Welcome dear students. Let us begin our session by taking the concept of role names, the degrees and the recursive relationship in ER model. Degree of a relationship type. What is the meaning of this? The degree of a relationship type is the number of participating entity types. So, how many entities are participating in a relationship? We all know with the earlier concepts that there exists a relation between any two entities, and if you just check out this diagram, you are finding supplier then project. So in between the supply term what you are observing, it is actually referred as a relationship name, and R1, R2, R3, whatever you are finding here, these are the relationship instances. Okay, so the relationship degree means it is referred in between the entities. Like in this relationship, how many entities are taking part? Supplier supplies for a particular project. Okay, so how many entities are participating? Two entities are participating. That is what with a degree. But the degree of a relationship type is the number of participating entity types. Fine. Hence, the works for relationship is of degree 2. So, what is that works for? Okay, now if you just check that this is employee entity, and this is what with the department entity. Okay, and the relationship, that which is a relationship we are telling now here, works for is a relationship between employee and department. So an employee works for a department. They say the degree of this relationship R is the number of participating entities. How many? Employee and department. These two entities are participating, and therefore the degree of this relation is given as what? Numbered as 2. Okay, and otherwise it is also referred with which name? Binary. So if the participating entities in a relationship, if they are only 2, then they are referred as binary. Okay, and one of degree 3 is called ternary. So when exactly ternary is referred? Suppose in a particular relationship, if the participating entities are more than 2, that is 3, then we refer the degree is how much? 3 or ternary. So just check this example here. Supplier supplies for a project, but what the supplier is going to supply? Supplier is going to supply parts for a project. Supplier supplies part for a project. Understood? So here the 3 entities are participating in this supply relationship, and this degree of this relationship is numbered as 3, or it is named as ternary. Okay, now just check out here students, the S1, S2, like that, some suppliers. Okay, let us take that there are n suppliers. So how much ever the suppliers entry are there, they all are the entity set of which entity? Supplier set, supplier entity. And similarly project J1, J2, J4. So how much ever the projects are existing or actually in running in a particular company, those projects they have numbered as J1, J2, J3. So these are the number of projects that are there in the company, taken up by the company, and these are the project entity set. Okay, so project is an entity, and the entity set J1, J2, J3, it is referring which entity? Project entity. And here part is also an entity, that is maybe the materials, or it could be some raw materials or any other information. Okay, so part, supplier supplies part for a project. So here let us take some physical objects which is being supplied by those suppliers. So P1, the parts means the goods may be referred as P1, P2, P3, like that. So they are the Entity set of which entity? Part entity. Okay. So I hope you understood. So in a relationship, if there is only two entities participating, then they are referred as binary. The relationship or the degree of that relation is 2 or binary. If the participation of entity is 3 in a relationship, then the degree of that relation is referred as 3 or ternary. Okay, this is with relationship degree. Then an example of a ternary relationship is supply, shown in the just now discussed diagram, where each relationship instance Ri associates three entities: A, supplier S, a part P, and a project J whenever S supplies part P to project J. So let us go back a little bit. Just check out here, students. Supplier 1, R1 is an instance, that is supplies. Supplier 1 supplies, just check the arrow mark here, connection, part 1, P1 to which project? J1 project. Similarly, supplier 1, R2, there is an supply instance or the relation supplies which part 1 itself to which other project? Project 2. Similarly, supplier 1 supplies R3, supply is a instance, relationship instance, supplies which part 2. See here, supplier 1 supplies part 2 to which project? Project 1. Okay, here if you take supplier 2 is having a supply instance relationship, that is he is supplying part 1 to which particular project? J1. Okay, so this is how it is being mapped. So if you just check here, supplier 2 is having the supply instance, it is supplying part 3. Okay, part 3 to which one? Project 2. Okay, this is how we map. Relationships can generally be of any degree, but the ones most common are binary relationships. So in our discussion, we showed the sample of binary relation as well as ternary relationship. But in most of the cases, we will be come acrossing which type of relationships? Binary. Okay. Then relationships as attributes. In the initial discussion, I told while collecting the data requirements, whatever the user found as attributes in the conceptual design or the initial conceptual design, whatever they have shown as attributes, later they will be refined as relationships, right? Yes. So with this thing, let us consider the below discussion. It is sometimes convenient to think of a binary relationship type in terms of attributes. So consider the works for relationship type in the figure. One can think of an attribute called department of the employee entity type, where the value of department for each employee entity is the department entity for which that employee works. Hence, the value set for this department attribute is the set of all department entities, which is the department entity set. So, it means what? Check out here, students. I have shown you this particular representation. Observe the entity, employee and department. Here, each employee has to work, or when we speak with the works for, employee works for a department. Of course, in the employee table or in the employee database file, there should be an information that a particular employee is working in which particular department. Yes or no? So observe the attribute here. So along with EMP employees SSN, there is a department number, department information. That is, just check out here. There is a department entity which is having unique department numbers in the company. For whichever the department that exists, unique department numbers are there. So department number 1, 2, 3 and 4. Okay, so just check out here. This is employee number, SSN number, employee 1, employee 2, 3, 4. Employee 1 is working for which department or is working in which department? Just check here. D1 is referred. So whether D1 exists here? Yes, D1 exists in the department number. Similarly, employee 2 is working for which department? It is D3, department 3. Yes, it is existing. Then similarly, employee 3 is working in which or works for which department? Department 1, D1. Just check out here. Similarly, employee 4 is working for which department? D2, department 2. Yes, department 2 exists. So, what they mean to say here is one can think of an attribute called department. See here, D what I have referred here is this attribute department of the employee entity type where the value of the department, what are the values for department D1, D3, D1, D2 I have put, right? Yes, where the value of the department for each employee entity. So for each employee it is showing some department values, right? So for each employee entity is the department entity for which that employee works. So what is the value it is telling? This value tells that in which particular department these employee works. Okay. Hence the value set for this department attribute is the set of all department entities. It means what? Whatever the values you are finding D1, D3, D1, D2. So these values are with reference to which value set, which entity set, the set or the entity set which are available here. See here in the department number you are finding D1, D2, D3, D4, right? So with reference to these value set, you are finding the values present in the employee entity. So hence the value set for this department attribute, that is in the employee entity, the department attribute, the values what you are finding here is the set of all department entities. So which are the set of department entities? This one, D1, D2, D3, 4, which is a department entity set. Okay, that is a mean. Now coming to the role name, what is this? Each entity type that participates in a relationship type plays a particular role in the relationship. So when we tell that entity is having a relationship with another entity means of course that entity has certain role name. Okay, or it is if it is participating in a relationship means certain roles may be present. Okay, so what is that? For example, employee and department. In the employee works for a department. The person who is actually working in a company, he is in which role? He is an employee. What about department? Department is something virtual, right? The name. It is what some in the real world we have the department kind of concept. So department is what? The employer who is employing the employee, right? So that is a role. Department is what? Employer, like that. So this is what we are now going to discuss. Each entity type which participates in a relationship type plays a particular role in the relationship. The role name signifies the role that a participating entity from the entity type plays in each relationship instance and helps to explain what the relationship means. It means what? That is, an employee is working for a department, an employee is working for another department, a particular employee is works for in this particular department. So how much ever the values are being entered, if there are 50 employee details, in all the 50 employees you find 50 relationship instances to which entity, department entity, and these 50 instances shows or explains what type of relationship exists between one entity, employee entity to department entity. Okay, so the role name is having its own significance while participating in relationship with another entity. Okay, and that role name tries to explain the design, in the design schema, what kind of relation exists between the entities. Okay, for example, in the works for relationship type, employee plays the role of employee or worker. He is a worker role, he is in the worker role, and department plays the role of what? Department or employer. So both the entities when they are into the relationship, so what is the role in that relationship with the employee? They are the workers or employee. What about the department? It is what? Either it can be simply called as department role or employer, because under that department the employees are working. So employer is considered. Okay. Role names are not technically necessary in relationship types where all the participating entity types are distinct. Since each participating entity type name can be used as a role name. What they mean to say here is specifying the role name is not mandatory, but if there are 50 employees and all the 50 employees are working in which one, the respective departments, it means what, they all are what, distinct to each other. No particular employee works for two departments. Are you all understanding? So a department can employ n number of employees, but an employee can work in only one single department. Are you all understanding? In a department, many number of employees can work, but an employee is working for a single department. That is the meaning. So in the relationship, works for relationship, the whichever the entities are participating. So employee is participating as a works for in a particular department means each 50 employees values are distinct. All the entity types are distinct since each participating entity type name can be used as a role name. So the entity type name itself can be considered to be as a role name. No need to give a special role name in the representation. The entity type name itself can be considered to be as a role name. Okay. However, in some cases, the same entity participates more than once in a relationship type in different roles. So they are telling, we spoke with binary relationship and ternary relationship, right? Where any two entities have a relationship. Is what any two entities having the relationship among themselves, then binary, right? So there are situations, in some cases, the same entity type participates more than once in a relationship type in different roles. So there is no existence of two entities. Instead, there is that is one single entity. It is going to participate how many times? More than once with different roles. A single entity participate more than once with different roles. I try to understand. So two times the same entity itself is participating in a relationship, but while participating in once, it will be in a particular role. Second time the same entity, when it is participating, it is behaving with different role. So what is that? What we call that as, and what is that example? Just check out here. In such cases, the role name becomes essential for distinguishing the meaning of the role that each participating entity plays. And such relationship types are called recursive relationships. So meaning to say, just now I told there is no compulsory that we should give a role name. The entity name itself acts as can be taken as a role name. But when exactly role name becomes important, mandatory, when the role names has to be given, that is when one entity is participating more than once with two different roles. Okay, with two different roles. In such cases, role names has to be given. So still confusion. Let us take the example now. Just check here. The supervision relationship type relates an employee to a supervisor, where both employee and supervisor entities are members of the same employee entity set. Just check out here, students. You have a relationship called as supervision. So we all know the meaning of supervisor, right? In the company, industries or factories and all, there will be a supervisor who is going to monitor the employees, the workers, right? Whereas if you take, the workers are also employees and the supervisor by himself, he is also one of the employee for that company, right? So here supervision is a relationship, and the supervisor is supervising the workers or employees. Means what? Supervisor is also an employee, workers are also an employee. So the employee entity, the same entity is participating more than once with two different what roles. Which is that role? One as a supervisor and another one as a supervisee or the employee. So that is what they mean to say. The supervision relationship type relates an employee to a supervisor where both employee and supervisor entities are members of the same employee set. So in the employee entity set, we find employee as well as supervisor. So supervisor by himself is a supervisor. Hence, the employee entity type participates twice in supervision, once in the role of supervisor, that is boss, and once in the role of supervisee or subordinate. So here they mean to say is both are employees, but employee who is participating as supervisor is referred as what? I mean, in the relationship, in the supervision relationship, any employee participating as supervisor, it is considered to be as a boss. And once the role in supervisee, the second role, it is what to be considered as a subordinate. So here the employee entity type participates two times in the relationship supervision, once as supervisor and once as supervisee. So each relationship instance or I in supervision associates two employee entities EJ and EK. That is EJ is what? One as a supervisor, EK as what? As a supervisee, one of which plays the roles of supervisor and other the role of supervisee. Now let's see this with the example. So this is a representation where you're finding an employee entity and supervision is a relationship. How do you understand that it is a relationship instance? See the information mentioned here, R1, R2, R3. These are the instances of relationship. E1, E2, E3, these are the entity set of an employee entity. Okay, so R represents the relationship part of an this particular relationship name. Let us now understand what is this 1 and 2. See, in the above diagram, the lines marked 1 represent the supervisor role. So it is a recursive. So the same entity is participating twice as two different roles. So one represents in which role the employee or the entity is participating, and two represents in which other role the entity is participating. So one represents which role? Supervisor role, and those marked 2 represent the supervisee role. So just understand student, in such kind of recursive relationship where the entity uh, take part twice in the relationship, there is a necessary to mention the role names, and here role names are which one? 1 and 2. 1 is what? I mean a small representation where 1 represents supervisor and 2 represents supervisee. Okay, and hence E1 supervises E2 and E3. So now let's just check out how they are doing it. So employee 1, see the mapping here. Let us go for role 1. So supervisor, right? So employee 1, it is a supervisor role. Just check here. Supervision supervises whom? E2. Employee 2, it is supervising. Again go to employee 1. See here there is a role 1. Employee 1 is a supervisor for which one? Supervising whom? Employee 3. Are you all understanding? So E1 in the role of 1 as a supervisor, it is supervising employee 2, as well as E1, see the role 1 here, supervising employee 3. Now let us go for employee 2. No, employee 2 doesn't have supervisor role. Employee 3 also is not having supervisor role. Come to E4. So E4 here you are finding 1, right? So E4 is a supervisor to which employee? To E6, isn't it? Similarly, E4, observe one more mapping is there with role 1. E4 is a supervisor for whom? Employee 7, right? Yes. Then coming to which one? Employee 5. Employee 5 is also having a supervisor role. Employee 5 is supervising whom? Employee 4. See, in turn, employee 4 was himself a supervisor, but this supervisor is also being supervised by some other employee. So E5 is acting as in a supervisor role and supervising whom? E4. Okay. Then E6. E6 is acting as a supervisee. E7 also supervisee. Okay. So this is how the recursive relationship is being shown. In this example, each relationship instance must be connected with two lines, one marked with 1 and the other with 2. So one supervisor, 2 with supervisee. This is what the representation of a recursive relationship. A recursive relationship supervision between employee in the supervisor role and employee in the subordinate role. Hope you all are following this. So any doubts, you can again ask me to repeat it for in any of the session. It is a very important concept in relationship type, recursive relationship. What do you mean by recursive relationship? Explain with an example. This will be the possible question. Okay. Okay, students, with this we finished discussing particularly about the relationship types, roles, degrees, and particularly with the binary, ternary, or what we call entity participating twice in a single, in the same, in different roles in a particular relationship, that is with termed as recursive. So with this, I'll conclude my session and meet you all with some new concepts in the next session.